Hey y'all, and welcome back to a new video. Today we're going to be looking at a chess game that I played recently in which I was able to absolutely obliterate a 2400 rated opponent with an accuracy of over 95%. Alright, so let's get into the chess. So I start off the game with pawn to d4, and my opponent goes knight to f6. After that, this is the most common way to play. Well, not the most common, obviously d5 is very common, but knight to f6 is the second choice. You see this at the top level all the time, and my specific way of play against this, which I have enjoyed for a majority of my time playing chess, is the move bishop to g5, which is the Trompowsky attack. And this actually makes black get into a couple very, very interesting options, and if black doesn't know what they're doing, they can get into some serious problems. So of course, my opponent knows what they're doing a little bit. They're 2400, they have seen this stuff before, and they're going to play the top lines for at least a little bit of the time. My opponent goes with pawn to d5, which is one of the moves, and here there are a couple lines, of course. There's the move knight to d2, which is very, very interesting, and pawn to e3. These are like the kind of main lines. Pawn to e3 is very solid, while knight to d2 is very aggressive. It's one of the most difficult lines for both sides, and that's why I'm not really playing it right now, because I don't really understand all the little nuances, and I'm normally getting bad positions with knight to d2. E3 is very solid. It's kind of boring. The line that I like to play mostly is this move bishop takes f6, and that's the line that I've been playing recently, just in like tournament play and just online in general. And the point is that now my opponent has kind of a little option. Either you take with the g pawn and get very combative, but actually white gets a lot of play with moves like c4, or you take with the e pawn, which makes the most sense, but this pawn on d5 gets a little bit weak if you take with the e pawn in some of these lines, and it can get really bad for my opponent. Most people play e takes f6 because it's more natural, and that's what you would play if you haven't seen this line before. G takes f6 is very combative, but in my opinion, I think it's a lot more difficult to play for black. G takes f6 because you're weakening your king a little bit. It's a little bit awkward, and I'm not a big fan, but my opponent goes with it. My opponent goes g takes f6, which is technically one of the top lines of the computer, and I like this move pawn to e3. And the point is that I'm going to be starting to play this move pawn to c4 soon. I'm going to play knight to c3. I'm going to play knight to f3. I'm going to put pressure on his center, and if my opponent goes to something like e5, there's an idea here, knight to f3. My opponent can obviously not take this pawn because he gets left with these terrible isolated f-pawns, and if he pushes forward, actually that helps white, because knight to d2 actually helps facilitate the move pawn to c4, and it's all very, very harmonious. It's a very, very nice position. But instead of e5, which is the move I was hoping that he'd play because I wanted to get in those lines, I hadn't really practiced them that much, and I wanted to get some practical play, e5 is the best move. My opponent instead went with the move pawn to e6, which also makes a lot of sense. He's just kind of being solid with the center, and here you might have noticed he spent over a minute on this move. So clearly my opponent is out of theory already, and I'm already in the driver's seat. So I think for a little bit, I decided to play the move pawn to c4. Pretty straightforward. This is kind of the plan most of the time. Taking is most likely the best move, because then I can't take him, and he really doesn't want to lose this idea of going pawn to c6 or pawn to c5 in the future. If you can hear that in the background, that is loud, angry gaming. So anyway, pawn to c4 seems very nice. It goes after the center. My opponent probably should take. Instead, he goes with a very, very mild move, pawn to c6, and I decided to follow up the move knight to c3. Pretty standard, putting more pressure on the center, developing my piece. My opponent goes knight to d7. I decide to develop another piece with the move knight to f3. Also very, very simple. There's an idea here where black goes with bishop to g4 in some of these lines and pins the knight to the queen. Obviously, my opponent can't do that right now, but I thought, okay, my opponent might be able to do that in some other lines, so let's try to get knight at f3 off now, and while I still have the chance. And now my opponent goes to the move f5, and here's the first moment where I actually start to think, and I come up with a really interesting plan. Also, this plan is, by the way, not the best move. This is probably the worst move I played all game, which is kind of funny, even though I think that it's completely reasonable. My idea was that in some of these lines, in some of these lines with g takes f6, there's ideas with knight to e5 and queen h5. and we go after the king like this. So I was thinking for a while, I was thinking, can I accomplish a knight on e5? Because that's exactly what I want. I want a knight on e5. He wants to go f4. I want to put a knight on e5. So I was thinking, and I realized a really good way to do it. And the point is, I'm going to take on d5. I'm going to take on d5. My opponent can't take like this, because then he has the same problem of this terrible pawn structure. And my opponent's not insane. He's not going to go for that. And after he takes with the c-pawn, after he recaptures with the c-pawn, I'm going to go this move, bishop to b5, pinning this knight to the king. And now this move is going to become an option, and I'm probably going to play it on the next turn. And then it seems like all of my pieces are getting very active, while his are a little bit passive. This bishop is by far the worst piece in his camp, because it's blocked by these two pieces. And after my bishop gets to b5, this knight is going to be really difficult to unstick. So I go for it. C takes e5. By the way, terrible move. It's not that bad, actually. I'm a big fan of this move. When your computer gives plus 0.3, but it's only good. It is like a plus 0.5 position. In any case, c to e5. I should have gone rook c1 for the record. c d5 and bishop to b5, which is my plan. My opponent goes queen to b6, allowing the move knight to e5. And already, as you can see, my position has kind of gotten to a point where I'm very, very happy. If my opponent is to play this move pawn to a6, which makes sense from a visual standpoint, just looking at it, you're like, oh, pawn to a6, this makes a lot of sense. I don't know, like probably this is a decent move. I thought that I was actually going to be winning in those lines, like actually just completely winning, because I would take the knight, he would recapture the bishop, and I would play the move queen to h5 over here. And he can't defend this pawn. And after he castles long, after he castles his king long, then he's actually right in the open file of my rook for the future. So I would probably simply castle. And I'd have this move knight f7 at some point to put pressure on this fork after long castles. So I was looking at this. For a while, and I was really hoping that my opponent would play a6. But alas, my opponent decides to go for a different line. But the idea remains the same. My opponent plays the move bishop to b4. And as you can see, this is a mistake. The best move here is pretty obvious. The best move is to go bishop b6. And the point is that you just really need to get rid of this knight. This knight is a huge problem in the black position, and White's just having a great time if White is able to keep this knight alive. I'm probably still going to play with a move like queen h5. I don't know, maybe I'll do something else. Computer gives queen a4, which is kind of interesting. Queen a4, rook c1. But in any case, that's not what happened in the game. He played the move bishop to b4. And I thought for a while here, because it's a very, very interesting position. There's a lot of little nuances in this position, and I have to be a little bit careful. Obviously, my opponent's threat, if I do nothing, is he's going to take this with check, pawn takes, and then he's going to take my bishop. So I have to do something about that first. My first intention was to play this move queen a4, which is actually one of the computer's top choices. It's basically equal with the other move, which is the one I played. And the point is that, okay, after he takes my knight, I'm going to recapture the pawn. I'm going to have immense pressure on the knight on d7, and life is going to be good. I'm going to eventually advance with the rook c1, c4. On the queen side, it's going to be a whole thing. My opponent's probably going to lose, and I'm going to be happy. But I thought I could probably get something more immediate going. So I thought for a little bit, and I came up with this very interesting idea. I started with the move short castles, which on a low depth, the engine despises. Unfortunately, this is not a low depth, and this is actually the top engine move of the computer. As you can see, 1.37, like the top is like 1.5 now, because the engine hasn't really understood the position. But if you go back in the video a little bit, it's going to be like 1.3. So yeah, this is the top engine move, also combined with queen a4. And the point is that after my opponent takes on c3, my idea was to take this here and go queen h5 intermezzo. And this is very important. I think this is a very, very important move. I'm leaving the bishop hanging. Here because, and the point is very, very simple. One, this is an active move that gets my pieces into the game. That's very important. The more pieces I get into the game, the better my position is going to be. Two, right now, he obviously can't save the bishop. If he saves the bishop, he gets mated. Like here, this is checkmate in 2. Pretty simple like that. Not really much to say there. And 3, this kind of forces my opponent to do something he doesn't want to do. I thought that the best move was long castles, which the computer agrees with. My opponent goes with the second move, which is rook f8, which makes a lot of sense. The point why long castles is a bad move, and why it's not a bad move, it's a great move. But the point why it's like still bad for black is because black is still kind of walking into the open file. Like, I'm going to take the bishop. I'm eventually going to play c4, bring the rooks to the c file and the b file, and it's going to be a whole thing. This queen is going to horribly misplaced. The king is going to be super weak, and it's going to be lost. It's going to be lost in the long run. In any case, my opponent goes with rook f8, which makes a lot of sense. He's just defending the pawn. He has to. And I decide, okay, now's probably the time to take on c3. I can't really do anything else, so c3, take on c3 makes a lot of sense. And my opponent realizes what he, kind of his mistake, and he goes with the move long castles. Now, there's a lot of very interesting nuances in this position as well. First of all, this looks like a free pawn. This looks like a free pawn. But I want to tell you that these are not free pawns. These are not free pawns. First of all, this loses immediately to bishop e8. And I can't save my pin. I'm going to lose the knight. So that's pretty simple. This move, queen h7, is actually one of the engine's top choices. This is the second choice behind the move that I played. But the reason why I didn't play it, the reason why I didn't take on h7, because it looks reasonable. It looks reasonable. The reason why I don't take on h7 here is because I just think that in the long run, practically speaking, why am I giving my opponent more chances to make counterplay? Like, now he gets the open file. Now he gets the open file. Now he gets this open file. My king is there. What am I doing? Why am I allowing my opponent all of this play? It seems kind of ridiculous. Sure, he's going to sack 2 pawns, but my losing chances are going to increase, and my winning chances kind of stay the same. So instead, I decided, okay, I could take the pawn, or what I could do is I could play against the king, which makes a lot more sense. And now I have the idea to put the rooks on these 2 squares, play c4, take this, and have a devastating attack. That's pretty simple, right? Pretty straightforward. Seems like that's exactly what I'm going to do. Rook a b1. Quite easy. My opponent goes back to c7, rook fc1. It's amazing how simple chess is at this level. My opponent probably here has to play the move pawn to f6, but I had calculated something very interesting here. Pawn to f6 actually doesn't stop my plan at all, because after pawn to f6, I had calculated this. Pawn to f6, I'm going to play the move pawn to c4. And it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what he does. It doesn't matter what he does, because if he takes, I'm going to take on d5. I'm winning the queen. Or, what the engine says, he loses the bishop, takes, and pawn to b6. And in this position, actually, white is plus almost 4. Plus almost 4. White's only up, well, I guess 2 pawns, but black can take this one back. White's really only up 1 pawn, which is this pawn, which looks a little weak. But actually, it's actually just horrible, because if my opponent takes here, then I take here. I'm threatening checkmate at the very least. Actually, there's even better with queen e2, but who cares? Queen e2, I come here. But who cares? Anyway, so I can take on h7. My opponent has to trade the queens. I don't have to take the queen. Sure, it's probably winning if I take the queen, but actually a move I'm thinking queen h5. Nope, sorry. Queen h5 loses because of rook h8. That doesn't lose, but queen h6 is the move that I should be playing. That's not queen h6. Queen h6. Thank you. Put pressure on this pawn and come back here. So now rook h8 is met with this move. And I play the move pawn to g3. And that would be what happens. Probably my opponent should go for that line. I don't think my opponent really has much else, because that kind of forces my hand, and maybe I'll make a mistake. I mean, probably not, but it's technically possible. Instead, my opponent goes with king b8, which also makes sense. It feels like he's kind of trying to fight. He's getting out of the square with this c4 idea. But okay, again, there's a queen on the other side. I have to rip it open. c4 comes on the board, and it's genuinely just over. It's really, really bad here. My opponent's king is getting beaten up over here. This rook's gonna come. The queen's gonna come back to f3 and enter the game like this, which is kind of interesting. And it's just a problem. It's just a huge problem. I'm about to take the pawn. I'm about to come in the position. It's terrible. It's really terrible. My opponent decides to take on c4, and on the next move, my opponent resigns. Now that's kind of insane. Why does my opponent resign this position? I'll give you some time to figure out. You can pause the video here. Why is this position just so bad for black? And I was looking at this. I was looking at this for a while. And what I ended up realizing, I had already calculated a long time here because my opponent spent a long time. Was it here? Yeah, in this position with king b8. I had calculated this line already that I was doing quite well. And in this position, after spending 10 seconds, I calculated that I was doing quite well here. But I didn't think it was resignable. And the reason why it's so bad for black, and I'm going to show you these lines real quick. The reason why it's so bad for black is because, let's say my opponent goes queen a5. This was the line I was calculating. My opponent goes queen a5. Now, I thought that the most natural move is to play the move rook cb4. This is what I was looking at. And after my opponent plays b6, I was just going to play the move knight c4. My opponent was going to take the pawn, and I was going to take here, and my opponent's going to get butchered. A, B, take. My opponent can't go here because there are some tactics. My opponent goes here. Queen f3 to mate immediately. I was already looking at all this. Of course, he blocks, takes, and checkmate like this. But actually, if you notice something pretty interesting there, knight c4 is a blunder, and it loses my entire advantage. The winning line in this position, and it's a little bit awkward. I can take on h7, which doesn't make much sense for like +2. I can come back to I can go to h6, which also doesn't make much sense. I don't feel like my queen belongs on h6. Or I can play the most natural move, the move that probably works the best, which is this move queen e2. And the point is, if we look at this position, why is knight c4 bad, but queen e2 is winning? Because if we look at this line, he takes, and then I completely win the game. The point is, my opponent can play this move queen d5. And now, after knight takes b6, I'm no longer winning. I'm no longer winning because, well, not in that line. My opponent goes king c7. King c7 only move. In this line, it even looks like my opponent's going to survive, not lose the game here. If king a7, it's losing to queen e2, which is very, very nice. But if king c7, somehow my opponent survives this, which is absurd. Like, I feel like queen e2, my opponent should lose like 10 out of every 10 games. But actually, it's a little bit more difficult than that. My opponent is able to kind of finagle his way out with the king, like rook g8. There's some line that I was calculating earlier, which actually makes a little more sense. Yes. Queen g5. Queen g5, and after like rook g8, I have like this check I was calculating. Sorry. Where was the line that I was looking at? Was it e4? I don't remember. Anyway, I thought that there was some line here where it's a little interesting, and eventually my opponent is able to find some way, like he has like some way to cut off my rooks with like some bishop move like this. And there's some really dastardly ways that my opponent is able to survive. But really, why this is so good is mostly because this queen can't get back into the game. This is why this is okay. Like I'm still better, obviously. Like I'm gonna play a move like queen e2, queen d1 maybe. I'm gonna come back into the game. Queen e1's already a mistake. Queen e2, I guess. Yeah, I'm gonna try and come back into the game like this, but already, I mean, I've lost so much advantage. What I'm supposed to do here is start with queen e2, and my opponent has nothing because my next move is going to be knight c4. I believe. My opponent plays f6, knight c4. Yeah. If my opponent plays this immediately, he should lose like all the time after rook takes b6. He probably has to just sack his rook here. Oh no, sorry, I have to play queen a6 only move. Oh yeah, of course. Anyway, but yeah, it's just kind of a disastrous position for my opponent, and this is why I resigned. And this is an easy game against 2400, which I hope happens more often. And I mean, it shows that probably I'm at that level. Like I can beat these guys. Like I can win these games, and it's a big boost of confidence. In any case, that's all we've got for you today. Hope you guys enjoyed. Hope you guys found it entertaining, instructive, all the above. If you did, remember to like, subscribe, do all what these YouTubers tell you to do. And yeah, that's it. Good evening and good night.